In order for companies to be successful, over time its management and operational systems have to be reviewed and the necessary steps taken to implement much-needed changes. Recognizing the importance of this, steps have been taken at the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission to review and enhance systems in place so that the organization can function more efficiently and effectively. This week on Dorado Shines, we will tell you more about the recently conducted review of GGMC's management systems and practices and clear the air on the misleading reports that have surfaced regarding this exercise.
The board, the GGMC, wishes to express its deep dismay with a grossly inaccurate and misleading article which appeared in the Sunday 5th edition of Culture News, captioned Management Review on GGMC filled with inaccuracies. The board conducted a review of the management systems and practices for critical departments of the Commission. The exercise began in December 2014.
The review was aimed at reviewing the operations of the Mines Division and Land Management and Geological Services divisions of the Commission to determine the coherence of the structures and functions.
You know, I joined the Commission somewhere around January last year. When I reviewed the performance of the Commission for 2014, having regard to the number of decisions that were taken by the board that were not implemented, for whatever reason. And when we get practically every day complaints by the public about issues affecting the performance of the Commission, bordering on all kinds of stuff, from corruption throughout, that it was necessary for us to just step back.
The management review sought to identify the available capacity of the Commission.
And more importantly, I had in fact, at the level of the board, caused the management to begin to address issues relating to the performance of the Commission in a strategic plan going forward. Now, they were busy working on the strategic plan, but from an internal perspective.
A team of consultants was hired to give a perspective on the performance of the Commission.
It would have been unwise for us to simply take management perspectives, bring it to the board, and try and address all the issues affecting the sector by a management perspective alone. And so these were the conditions, the circumstances that warranted the decision to proceed to have a team of consultants come in and give us a perspective of what was happening, bearing in mind the performance evaluation which the board was attempting to do, and thirdly the need for us to get a strategic plan going forward.
The inception report of the consultants is an internal report of the board of the GGMC, and it is part of a staged process to produce a full representative document of the essential reforms which have to be undertaken at GGMC.
Both the PSC, Public Service Union, and the Golden Diamond Mines Association were informed and were given copies of the terms of reference before the exercise commenced. Apart from a few observations, particularly as it relates to the question of capping of mining claims, to the extent that one miner shouldn't have that much claims. And second, the report did address, in some instances, names of persons operating in the various areas. And that could have well been caused because the report was supposed to be internal.
The report recommended a number of initiatives which could be taken to reverse the poor image and performance of the Commission.
The consultants were asked to present their report at this forum, and at that forum, all the stakeholders were present. It was chaired by me. At that forum, apart from these sort of issues that were raised, there was a general consensus that the inception report presented significant insights into the areas which may be contributing to the poor image and performance of the commission. Even if a report was leaked that was not intended to be in your domain, would you want to put items in there in a draft report concerning people when in fact the workshop that we had agreed, among other things, that the capping issue would be removed, that the reference to persons will be removed, and here it is that somebody went out there and took our report and make it public. Is that not tabloid journalism?
The board and the consultants are of the view that information dispersed to the public was a misrepresentation of the facts aimed at misleading the public.
Obviously, if I were the consultant, I've been very, very, very angry. They're appalled, to be frank with you, particularly because we called everybody together. We tried to extract from them your views. We tried to present to the group, the stakeholders, what in fact is the best approach. Having a general consensus that this approach might be the best one, except for some things we have to remove. To go out there and to make a statement like that, to me, is malicious, is otherwise misleading and otherwise, have other kinds of motives. The dissemination of this Inception report to the public at large was never authorized by the board. The board wishes to reassure the public that it is committed to an ordered and sustainable growth of the mining sector, premised on increased capacity of an enhanced GGMC to superintend over this specific development. The unfortunate and misguided impression is created that the review was conducted with sinister motives by the board in collusion with the ministry.
I like to encourage people to take your garbage and take it home with you if you have to. You don't have to throw it on the streets.
Littering is not advisable, it's not healthy, and it's not right, so please don't litter.
When we litter, we damage our environment. We destroy the marine life. Let us protect our environment and more so bring back Guyana to the beauty that it once was and it can surely be.
Stop littering. Do the right thing.
Government assisting miners. The government of Guyana has set aside the sum of $1 billion Guyana dollars for a revolving mercury-free mining development fund as to provide low-cost financing to miners to adopt mercury-free and increased gold recovery technologies. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. The Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment and the Government of Guyana are working closely with the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, looking at ways through which miners can be given further incentives to incorporate mercury-free technologies into their practices.
Just over a year ago, the government had put aside $1 billion to be used in relation to this recovery and minimization or removal of mercury from the process. Mining equipment and mining for gold and diamonds is a little different in the sense that you have different grades and all of that, different areas where these things are occurring, and therefore different technologies to be able to go after them and recover them optimally.
The Commission is continuing to make lands available for miners.
We just completed, as we promised, lotteries in 2 mining areas. We went to the Northwest in Kaituma, and we did also another one in Madia, even though the one in Madia didn't come out so well.
Government assisting miners. A list of 19 suppliers of mining equipment and spares was approved for tax waivers on the importation of this equipment. This will reduce the cost of spares and critical supplies for miners and is an addition to items that are already being imported duty-free, such as pumps, flexes, and matting. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Government assisting miners. Small and medium-scale operators benefit from duty-free access to all-terrain vehicles, or ATVs, excavators, bulldozers, and other machinery used in the mining industry. These waivers on duty are available to new entrants to the sector and for current miners based on production levels. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. ExxonMobil, the world's largest publicly traded international oil and gas company, has begun exploration work in Guyana, despite objections from neighboring Venezuela.
The next set of slides are really some comments on how we view a positive investment climate between the government and the investment community. And I had not previously seen the prior presentation, but you'll see an incredible number of similarities here as to how we view, from an industry perspective, what needs to be done versus the government. So at the highest level, we want to maximize the country's hydrocarbon resources. There's a finite amount of hydrocarbon out in the ground, and it's our goal, in concert with the government, to optimize the amount that comes out at an economic value. We want to have a structure and terms that are equitable to both. Equitable not meaning 50-50, but equitable in terms of risk, investment, et cetera, with the government. We want to ensure alignment throughout the project life, and that's possibly the toughest thing, as was described already. In the early days, it's all capital investment on the industry's part. We get to a plateau period where everyone's sharing neatly in the value of a plateau production, and then having an agreement that actually addresses what happens past that as you're in decline and reduced incomes and cash flows. How do the agreements work with the government, and how can we still be aligned through those different phases? And the last two comments on here, I think, go for any industry here in Guyana: a stable and sustainable business environment, and really a clear and practical framework for the laws and regulations, which were also addressed. So just touching on these in a little bit more detail, to realize the greatest value, we want to have the maximum economic recovery. What's interesting is, in any oil accumulation, you may or may not be aware, we rarely get 50% of the oil out of the ground, and that's due to the nature of the physics of the rocks and a bunch of other things. But through different types of investment, you can get more and more oil. You can spend a tremendous amount of money and get virtually all of it out, but most of those endeavors are not economic. So we base our decisions on an initial development, and then as time progresses, we get further into that development. You have infrastructure, and then you weigh and measure what other things can be taken on to get more oil out of the ground. One thing that's critical is the duration of the contract terms are consistent with the resource, the life of the resource. You don't want the investor cut off in midstream because he's going to make his investments predicated on the termination of that license, right? So he's going to take a look at where the end is. So the best reservoir management and evaluation of and development of that reservoir is done with a contract that lasts through the life of that resource. Incentives for incremental recovery projects. Those are the things that, after you make your initial investments to get the oil out of the ground, what else can be done to get even more oil out of the ground? And those may have different economics, and will have different economics, or you would have done them up front, than the initial development. And marginal fields. So we go out into these areas and look for the big field, because that is the one that sets the infrastructure. So once the infrastructure is out there, you have the capability in so many areas to then exploit some of the smaller accumulations that exist. And so how do you stew that into your regulatory framework to make that attractive to the parties? And of course, incentives for applying the best technology. Many companies have their own technologies and want to make sure that that technology is protected. Discover and develop and produce resources in the most efficient, safe, and environmentally sound manner. For many in the room, they're going to say, I'm really weak on the environmentally sound part of this. I've really focused on the investment portions here. I think it's critical, and when in developing the framework, that we have incentives for cost efficiency. There's so many agreements around the world where cost efficiency isn't the primary consideration, yet it should be to both parties. As an economic concern, we definitely want to make profit and be cost efficient, but in some of these agreements, you need to take a look at the cost recovery mechanisms and make sure that those provisions are really good for the government as well as the investor. The worst examples are that you can make an economic return drilling dry holes in some of the PSAs just by the way they were constructed, and that makes no sense to anyone. Access to a capable workforce and practical local content. I really want to impress on everybody, the oil companies want as much local content as possible. That's economically smart. We want local Guyanese to be running the operations here and working working through the development and exploitation of the resource. I think in any of the more mature affiliates that we have, we're typically in excess of 95% local content. You always have expertise with some people coming in from other areas. Now, the hesitation there is not to put in a line, I think, in the framework that says we need 95% local content, because that's an evolving measure, but it is in the best interest of both the company and the country to get there. So our comments would be, we'd really like to see some flexibility in getting to those ultimate goals, depending on the technical needs and skill sets required to get through the different phases of the development.
Government assisting miners. Miners in Guyana have access to 10% of their gold sales available in US dollars to assist in retooling and capital acquisition. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment is optimistic of an oil and gas discovery in the country.
In 2011, when the ministry was established and we had a thorough review of how it is do we oversight, manage, and plan for the eventual development of an oil and gas sector, we recognized that we needed to be prepared for the eventuality, and I want to be an optimist, not a blind optimist, not an unreasonable optimist, but the eventuality of a significant commercial oil and gas discovery in our country. And it was our government and, in fact, the people's expectation that those who are entrusted with the responsibility would so take the necessary steps in preparing our country for an oil and gas sector. And when we looked at the framework that existed then, whilst there was significant amount of work and guidelines, and if you look in terms of the legislation, it tended to focus primarily on exploration and in terms of promotion, and did not sufficiently deal with the issue of upstream, meaning when you've hit that discovery, what next? What happens? And we didn't want to be caught, as it were, off guard, and then to commit, and in many regards, the errors we've seen in other places, and I don't want to be singling out any country or any particular situation, but I thought that, and the guidance that was given was that we need to prepare so as to prevent any untoward or negative consequences as a result of the country being ill-prepared and not ready for an oil and gas sector. And so we entered into a number of engagements with bilateral as well as multilateral partners and how it is we can get the type of support in having a comprehensive overview of the situation. And the Commonwealth Secretariat services were secured, and hence we're here today. There's many aspects that we have to address, and the consultant and the representative of the Secretariat pointed out. And already we are looking at next steps in terms of implementation. And we will start very quickly in terms of looking at the legislation, because some of the legislation that we have there date back to the 1980s. There are lots of development. We need to, even the model agreement that we have, even that too has to, as it were, has to have some sort of relevance or direct bearing on the legislation. So that for us is a priority. The second issue coming out of the recommendations, and I want to make it absolutely clear that we have no difficulties with the recommendations, the observations, and the proposals that are outlined in the draft policy. So I want to make that absolutely clear. And so it is now moving in terms of how do we address those areas that have been identified and move very quickly to in having those comprehensively dealt with in the interests of our nation. But the priority will be in terms of legislation, looking in terms of harmonization too, in terms of the different functions, not only for the activities that we have taking place now in terms of exploration, but also how do we in terms of harmonize in looking towards the phase of production and development of an oil and gas sector. And so that will be an area of adequate, we will give adequate attention to, but not singularly with the Commonwealth Secretariat, because as I've said, we've engaged a number of bilateral partners, some near and some far, in terms of looking at how it is we can have the right environment, the right framework, the right system, the right arrangements that will do justice to the people of Guyana in terms of how do we manage the sector in going forward.
You have to help your employees and others understand safety is something that is a value, it's inside of each individual, and it's how you decide you're going to be.
There's no reason whatsoever that anybody needs to get hurt.
And I tell our employees everywhere I go, that's not a slogan. We absolutely believe we can get there.
We know it's possible because we have done it.
One location has gone 34 years without a lost time incident.
In this organization, we don't put any business above safety.
We'll figure out how to do it safely or we won't do it at all. It's as simple as that.
Being a true safety leader isn't about keeping yourself safe, it's about keeping everyone around you safe.
I am accountable for every individual that is in my team.
If we feel something is unsafe, we're empowered to intervene.
And we are all expected to be risk managers.
When an incident happens, it's not about pointing fingers or blaming. It's about, let's try to figure out what went wrong so that it never has to happen again.
We operate in so many different environments, so many different weather conditions, and most times they're very harsh and they're very severe.
You have so many different facilities with different risks, different challenges, but we're all talking the same language and using the same systems to manage those risks.
The employees are utilizing that on the job and taking that home, taking that to the communities.
I think I'll take this mentality with me all the way through my life, and hopefully it will help me to never ever get hurt.
Since it becomes really part of who you are, it affects your family in ways you'd never imagine. My children have become little safety ambassadors out there.
The joy I get when I look at my daughters and how they conduct themselves in their day-to-day life is they're watching out for their own safety now. They're watching out for each other.
31 years I've been going home safely, so
Obviously, that is a good message to my family.
An employee of one of the contractors came up to me and said, you know, I want to come back and work for you guys again next year because I feel safe working here. I feel that you're taking care of me.
A year from now, we won't remember if we were under budget. We won't remember if we were ahead of schedule. But an injury, a serious injury to one of our people, we'll remember that forever.
We're not done yet. We'll never be done.
The quest is never done.
We're never going to stop. We're never going to relax. We're never going to be satisfied until we have that environment and culture where everybody goes home safe every night.
I'm often asked what's an acceptable number when it comes to safety statistics or metrics, and the only acceptable number is 0.
As long as you approach everything with the right mindset and you have the systems, you have the people involved, it's absolutely achievable.
We know we're at on the journey, we're committed to getting there, and we're going to be relentless.
Check us out on the internet for this and every episode of Dorado Shines. Just go to YouTube, search for Dorado Shines and start watching. Or like us on Facebook and receive instant updates. You've been watching Dorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, do remember that we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.